Hello, everybody. Good day, wherever you are. Good evening, good morning, wherever you are listening from. This is Hour of Healing. We are back again for this week's episode, and it's going to be a continuation of last week's episode, which was Cure to Frustrations. And by the
Mm.
grace of God, we were able to delve into the definitions, backgrounds of it. I'm not generous like that. I'm not going to give you what we talked about. Maybe Dr. Joe will do it. But I am your host, Candace. I'm here with Dr. Joe once again to continue last week's episode. So we hope your week has been well. Last week's episode really blessed me, and I hope it blessed somebody out there too. Okay, so Dr. Joe, how did you feel about last week's episode?
Yes, Candice, thank you so much for hosting us again. And dear audience, thank you for joining us again this week. And last week's episode, I believe, was very, very powerful. As I had mentioned to our audience in the introduction or the background, that these are things that I have been living through in recent weeks. And so it was something that was brought to the forefront of my life and my mind.
Right,
And when I found that I actually had a topic written down sometime middle of last year or whenever it was, it really hit home to me. And so for me, it was basically an opportunity to share the journey that
mhm,
I was recently reintroduced to. It's not that this is
right,
the first time I'm dealing with frustrations and things like that.
mhm,
And it's definitely not the last time I will be dealing with frustrations. But these are tools that I believe help me. And these are tools that I believe I can build on. And
right,
so, yes, in the near future, if we get another principle unlocked to us, we will have a part three. But certainly, it was a blessing for me to be able to share with our audience something that I have applied recently in
right,
my own life and seen work. And we'll be
right,
talking about how it worked when we
right.
talk about cures of frustration today. So thank you.
That's very good. And last week I was just sitting down listening to the discussion and I was thinking to myself, these are things that we never really talk about, like people talk about, people take time to think through. And one thing that I really love on Hour of Healing is when we speak about emotional things, right? Things that has to do with our emotions. Because when we look around us in our lives, a lot of things are caused by our reactions, like what
Correct.
we reacted wrongly to, rightfully to, what we said at the wrong time because of how we were feeling about something. So I really love it when we talk about things that has to do with emotion, right?
Mhm.
And to be able to get the different definitions of anger and frustration and worrying, that really was an eye opening for me, and I think it blessed some viewers out there too, or listeners out there. But today we're gonna go into cure to frustrations, right?
Correct.
So last week you made mention about conscience and knowledge having to do
Correct.
with causes of frustration, right? And I think because of time, we're not able to really go in depth. So if you can bring that back and then we'll, try to break it down until we get into the actual cures for these causes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, Candice, thank you so much. And you are absolutely right. For the sake of time, we were not able to really dive into the aspect of conscience and knowledge. And I think I talked more about conscience and not so much about knowledge. But what I was trying to get across, and I think it's very important for us to understand, you rightly identified that most of the things that we do is as a result of reactions or responses. Now, my question is, what is triggering that reaction?
Right.
What is triggering the reaction is a consciousness that we have. There is an adage in Ghana that says that nobody teaches a child to do wrong or to do right. Those are things that are embedded within us. And it's embedded in this aspect of our being called our conscience.
Mm,
And so, what we need to understand is that the mere fact that your conscience regulates good and bad means that you don't necessarily miss anything external to help you know what is good or what is bad. But you need something to form parameters or guardrails to justify or to testify to your conscience that what you're doing is truly good or
Mm,
truly bad. And that is where really knowledge comes in. And so, Candace, the simplest example I can give our audience is, do you realize that at some point in your life, the things that you consider to be so okay today were some things that you would not even dare try to do?
mhm,
There are things that you are comfortable with now just by sheer knowledge that you probably spoke against in the past.
mhm,
Why? Because knowledge is the parameter for conscience. Knowledge is what guides our conscience
mhm,
until our spirit is regenerated. And that is where sometimes we can get confused. Because when the spirit becomes regenerated, our spirit is the communication hub with God. And
mm,
so the spirit is supposed to be trained to assume control of the body and the soul or the mind. If we don't allow the spirit to do that, we will still err. And so it's very important that we understand that knowledge is what governs the conscience of an unregenerated person,
mhm,
an unsaved man. The spirit is what gives life. The conscience does not give life. And so, what I want our audience to understand that within us, automatically we are predisposed to frustration because until our spirit gives us life, the conscience is being limited by a body of knowledge that continues to change.
mm, mm,
And as long as our knowledge changes, we will have frustrations. And I will give a biblical example. I believe it was Paul who mentioned, and I can be wrong, but I believe it was Paul. He talks about a weak mind and a strong mind. And what he was talking about was eating food that had been sacrificed to idols or food that had been placed before idols. And he talked about the fact that if someone being spiritually strong, in other words, being of a sound conscience, eats a food that had been placed before idols, they don't err. But because it will cause someone with a weaker mind, he was not really saying their mind was weak, but talking about the body of knowledge available to them. That's what he said, their mind is weak. And
mm,
so someone with a limited body of knowledge can see what the one with a lot of knowledge is doing and say that they are blaspheming, and then they will fall. And
mhm,
so Paul said that if your eating will cause your brother to fall, then don't eat.
mm,
Why? Because it's their knowledge that governs their conscience. And
mhm,
if your knowledge permits you, why would the knowledge of the one with a so-called or quote-unquote strong mind not prevent him from eating food that is sacrificed to an idol? Because the one who is spiritually strong knows that there is only one God. And so to them, eating the food that was put before a wood or a clay or a rock or a stone doesn't really matter
mm,
because they don't recognize them as God.
mm,
But the one who Paul describes as with a weak mind still sees that as a God. And
mm,
so if you eat what was sacrificed to them, you will err. How does this tie into frustrations? Again, this what I'm trying to show our audience is that internally
mhm,
we are battling things that manifest in various ways. And so in part one, we talked about other causes of frustration. And all these causes, permit me to say, have their roots in either knowledge or limited knowledge or in our conscience judging something that our knowledge is telling us
It's
the
wrong,
opposite.
right?
And so there is that conflict. And because that is there, what someone is doing, the car note you couldn't pay, the food that your spouse didn't warm up, or the food that you bought from the restaurant that was cold. I mean, it's not the waiter who made the food. So why are you frustrated with the waiter? Because there is this battle or this struggle of the conscience and knowledge within you that
Mm,
without the spirit, your spirit becoming regenerated will continue to spew frustrations. And
mm,
so hopefully that clarifies or that adds up and completes what we started talking about
right.
last week. And just because I'm talking about this, I will again go back to what I said last week, that for this reason, that is why the most important need
It's
of
to be
anyone unsaved is to be saved.
right.
For the unregenerate, leave the business of transformation, spiritual power, whatever it is. Your need is to become regenerated so your spirit can come alive. Now, when your spirit is alive, your spirit needs to be transformed. And that happens through knowledge, through
Hmm.
teaching, through the word and the spirit. The two of them is what brings about that transformation.
Right.
Now, when transformation has happened, then you can start worrying about power. Because without this, we will get power and still remain very frustrated with life.
Wow. I was thinking about what you're saying, and I'm thinking to myself that when it comes to the Spirit, the Holy Spirit, right, and with the conscience and knowledge and the distorted transition of messages or interaction of messages that goes between them, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, so what spews out frustration is misalignment sometimes, right?
Yes, because of limited knowledge.
Right. So there's like a misalignment, there's like confusion going on, there's like a distortion going on between them, but it's the spirit. It's only the spirit that can align the conscience and the knowledge together to be able to feed you the right information for you to respond appropriately to situations, right?
Correct.
Um and
Correct.
and so and I like the fact that you brought in the need for salvation.
Yes.
Because that opens the door for knowledge. It opens the door for the Holy Spirit to transform our spirit. So that's very powerful. The need for salvation is crucial in this topic that we are talking about. You know,
Yes. Yes. And like this, as you were talking, text that came to my mind as to why it's so crucial is now we begin to understand why scripture says the fear of the Lord is the beginning of
of wisdom.
wisdom. When you continue to read in the book of Proverbs, it doesn't just say the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, it also says the fear of God is the beginning of knowledge.
Mm,
And so you align the conscience and knowledge because both submit to the spirit.
mm,
But as long as the spirit is there, conscience rule.
mm.
And so frustration is always going to boil out or things of that nature.
Right, right. And I'm listening to this, and like I said, I think last week was when it started. The feeling started of what can I do? How do I prevent this? You know,
Mm,
we avoid that. And
correct.
so, going into the cure, which is the cusp of our discussion, cure
Yes.
to frustrations, I think it would be better to start from what we discussed, take it one step at a time, because if we talk about the general idea of cure to frustration, some people
Mm,
may have, they will be left with questions. So
correct.
I'll leave it to you to go into it, but then I'll bring in, diverse aspects of the things that we've talked about so that we can see it from those angles as well.
Absolutely, absolutely, Candice. And you are right. The truth is that is why we are here, right? This is our
Mhm.
healing. And so we've spent the last week and the first half of this week talking about causes and what frustrations are,
Mm,
but how do we cure them? So
right.
again, this is very important and it's so interesting that the text for this conversation, I know I mentioned, I believe, beginning of the year, that I will try as much as we can to let our audience know the biblical text or foundations for these topics that we talk about. So the text that was written sometime last year was Lamentation chapter 3, verse 27, and I believe I wrote up to 32. But just the background to this text, with Lamentations was really written by the prophet Jeremiah. And for those who are a bit familiar with biblical studies, Jeremiah was a young boy when God anointed him prophet. In fact, he says, I anointed you before you were born.
Mhm.
And so he starts prophesying, warning God's people for a period of about 40 years. 40, Sister Candace, telling them of the imminent danger of their disobedience, the captivity that will come, the suffering, the pain, the fact that they will become destitute if they don't turn from their ways.
Mhm.
The sad part is, Sister Candace, nobody listens.
Mm.
What frustration is more than this? And so Jeremiah was at a point called the weeping prophet
Mm.
because
Mhm.
he had all this knowledge. Again, this knowledge that was supposed to help the people manage or keep their conscience in check, but they would not listen. The control for conscience was presented to them and they rejected it. And so that stems frustration
Mm.
until every single thing that he prophesied about, Sister Candace, happened. And when it happened, now he writes lamentations. Lamentation, remember a few weeks ago, I talked about the fact that lamentation is not really looking at ourselves with loathing, but rather looking at ourselves in an honest way with repentance. So we lament our faults so we can repent. And
Mm.
so Jeremiah now is sitting still in Jerusalem because he decides to stay with his people and not go to Babylon. And he is writing about what he is feeling now. And
Mm.
he writes something very powerful in Lamentations chapter 3, Sister Candace, that I want our audience to pay attention to. When you read from verse 1, it kind of gives you the background of everything I just talked about. It talks about the fact that I am the man who has seen affliction by the wrath of his wrath, talking about the pains and the hurts that he had gone through. But let's go to verse 27, which is where our text is. Remember, we are talking about the cure for frustration. This
Frustrates.
is what Jeremiah, the weeping prophet, someone who knows frustration. This is what he says. It is good for a man to bear the yoke in his youth.
Mm.
Let him sit alone and keep silent because God has laid it on him. It
Mm.
is good for a person to bear their frustrations in their youth. Sister Candace, why is this important? Before we even get to the cures, one of the things that I see that brings regret at the end of life, in the night phase of life, is not dealing with frustrations in our afternoon and evening phases of life.
Mhm.
When people refuse to bear the things or to deal with the things that bring frustration because they have energy and strength and resources and know-how, they can get by. But guess what? In your evening phase, that storm will catch up to you.
Mm.
So I want our audience to understand this, that frustrations happen to everyone.
Right.
But according to Jeremiah, it is good that you are bearing your frustrations now. That alone, Sister Candace, is a cure.
Mm. Mm.
That alone is a cure to frustration. To understand that this is the time that you and I have to bear frustrations. This is the time that we have to fight these battles. One of the things I know one of your questions had to do with relationships.
Wow.
Sometimes couples would not address situations in their marriage or whatever relationship they are in early. They would wait, hoping and thinking that when things are good and when we are on the same page and when the kids are out of the house and when this happens and that happens, when everything is good, then we will address them. Guess what? If you choose that route, your frustrations will lead to regret.
Mm.
So, one of the main things that before we even go to these skills that I have listed here is to have this understanding that this is the time to bear your frustrations,
Mm.
which means that if your source of frustration is the need for salvation, now is the time to be saved.
Mm.
If your source of frustration is the lack of transformation because of lack of knowledge, now is the time to acquire the knowledge.
Mhm.
And if your frustration, like myself, is the absence of power, guess what? Now is the time to get or to engage the principles that brings that power.
Hmm.
This is a powerful, powerful secret, Sister Candice.
Wow.
And if we miss it, we spend years in the long run looking back. And then, like I said last week, we start blaming people here and there
Mhm.
and things of that nature.
Wow, wow, that's very powerful. You said something about bearing our frustration. So, in other words, are you saying that it's right for us to feel frustration right now? Is that what you are saying?
What I'm trying to say is you have to realize that for you to even get on this journey of obtaining cure for your frustration, you need to understand that being frustrated doesn't mean that something is wrong with you.
Okay, okay,
It's good for you to bear it now. That
okay,
the things that bring frustration is good for you to recognize them
okay,
and deal with them now.
okay.
It doesn't mean that you are the worst person or a bad person
Mhm.
when you go through frustrations.
Wow, wow. So, is there a person who is feeling frustrated, but then they don't know what's making them frustrated?
Well, that's again, this will actually lead us to the cures for frustration because the simple answer that I can say is yes. And it's not yes because it's right, but yes because the person is in denial.
Hmm.
One of the first cures for frustrations is being honest about your frustration with God, with yourself, and with others. You have to come to this place of honesty about your frustrations. There are people who have frustrations, but rather than being honest about the frustrations, they will deny them. And if you deny it, you don't get the cure for it.
Hmm.
Why was someone, Sister Candace, deny their frustration? Because being honest about your frustrations or things that trigger your frustrations, one will require humility,
Okay.
two will require discipline, three, it will require submission. And you and I both know that these three things are things that we will do everything within our power to reject. Why? Because it makes us feel as though we are not in control.
Wow.
And so, yes, there are people who would say that they are not frustrated, not because truly they are not frustrated, but they are in denial or they are refusing to accept that they need to, one, humble themselves. They are refusing to submit. And frankly, sometimes we will refuse to discipline ourselves. For example, Sister Candice,
Mhm.
if the source of your frustration is social media, most people will justify their use of social media rather than be honest about where they are and say that I lack knowledge because my knowledge base is shallow. I get all my knowledge from social media.
Mm,
Now, if you're getting your knowledge from social media, there is no in depth understanding of what you're getting, it's just opinions. And so, if your opinion is just based on somebody else's opinion, then you can easily be frustrated. Sister Candace, this is why we have such a division in our country today, because a lot of things that we are divided about is not because of what really is happening, it's because we are forming opinions based on other people's opinion. And
mm,
for that reason, we are refusing to be honest to ourselves. We are refusing to be humble, to have a dialogue. And so someone will go to war in our day and age based on what they think is right because of somebody else's opinion.
mhm, mhm, mhm,
Frustrations.
mhm,
So the first cure to frustration truly is honesty. And there is no place that I think this plays as major as a role as in relationships.
mm,
Because of the emotions attached to it, because of the emotions that we feel in relationships, we always would want to not be honest about the things that are triggering our frustrations, or we will refuse or reject when those things that trigger frustration are brought up.
mm, mm. Yeah, that is very powerful how you brought in relationship because I'm thinking to myself, and I feel like sometimes too is, we refuse to be honest to our partners or be honest about how we feeling and what is triggering us because we don't want to expose our weakness, right?
Correct.
But in actuality, the person chose you, in your faults and all. So it's just something that I wanted to point out there that sometimes we want to keep things to ourselves. We want to be perfect in our partner's sight, but they didn't choose you for your perfections. They
Correct.
chose you for all of you. So I think it helps a relationship mature when both is
Absolutely.
vulnerable, like you said, humility. They can be vulnerable and be naked before one another in spite of what it is. If you rob a bank, just tell me you rob a bank. You understand? That's just by the way, but yes, so it's just something I wanted to point out that it's much difficult when emotions are involved because you want
Absolutely.
to maintain the feeling of they love me,
Yes.
I'm
Yes.
their number one and all these kind of things. But I think it's a very powerful thing when we can break off of that and say, this is who I am. This is what's triggering me. Accept me or not. It helps you know who you are with in actuality. But
Absolutely.
yeah, so going on, I think in the past last week we spoke about careers, lifestyle.
Mm.
So if we can pick it one at a time and go into
Okay.
the cure for
Okay.
those, I
Yeah.
think it'll be
Yeah, absolutely. It's like, so yes, of course. Like I said last week again, these cures apply to everything, but we will try because of us separating them last week, we will try to tie them into what we're talking about. So we just talked about relationships, right?
mm,
Now, careers, I believe, was the next one that you talked about. How do we deal with frustrations in careers that we talked about? And I believe the cause that we talked about was lack of control and poor time management. And the way we deal with frustrations in career is pruning our expectations or our desires,
mm,
preferably through God's purpose and God's timing. And
mm,
I will explain, Sister Candace. I cannot list for you the number of times that personally and also in my interactions with others, frustrations have come that we only look back to see that it was God's timing all along.
mhm,
I wrote a song, Sister Candace. I know. I wrote a song, and the title of the song is All I Want. And in that song, I was one time praying, thanking God and things of that nature. And it just dawned on me that when I was frustrated about where I was in life, pursuing my career, and looking at the surroundings, the financial struggles, the emotional tortures and things like that, and the tears that I shed, and the anger and the frustrations that I had. Looking back, and this is all in the place of prayer, at that moment, it was like a scene passed in front of me, and I could see the emotions that I was going through. I could feel them. And then I look at where I am at that moment, and I was like, wow, it's really true that God's time is the best. And if I knew how life would look like, I probably wouldn't have been so frustrated at those times in the past. Looking at your life now, you will realize that if you had pruned your expectations from the standpoint of God's timing and God's purpose, there are battles in your marriage you probably wouldn't have fought. There are things you would have been frustrated with your parents that you wouldn't have been frustrated about. Why? Because our timing is sometimes so different from the timing needed for our purpose. So like this, there were times that my greatest frustrations that led to anger and arguments in my relationships and with my friends and things like that truly was because I knew, and I still know today, that I felt I was delayed in life. And so, because of that, every response or every reaction stirred up or came out wrong. But years down the line, when I look at the timing of how everything is unfolding in my life now, I ask myself, was that truly a delay? Or it was just God's timing? Don't get me wrong, delays in life do happen, and delays are not good for the most part. But the truth is, if you know the number of hours in your life you will spend sitting at a red stop, you will not be frustrated when you have to stop at a red light for 2 minutes. So, pruning our expectations, understanding this, that our life is really not a linear thing, that there are forces at play greater than us. And yes, whereas in many instances, those forces don't have good intentions. If you know anything about God, you will understand that his plan is good and his plans cannot be thwarted. Thwarted means they cannot be delayed. So it can tarry. My Bible scholars will finish that statement for me, but it will not be denied. It can tarry, but it will not delay. It is for an appointed time. And realizing that the vision of your life and your purpose is for a set time will cure many frustrations in your life.
So true. That's so true.
Can we go to the next one?
Yeah. Yeah, that was very powerful.
Thank you so much, Jesus, for being with us throughout the start of this conversation. I am excited about where we are going with this conversation, and I cannot wait for part 2 as we finish up today's all-important discussion. Friends, don't forget to share Hour of Healing with your loved ones, because as we day in and day out say on this show, No matter where you are in life, everybody needs healing from something to something. God bless you so much for sticking with us. We believe that you have been blessed by our first part of today's discussion. We have laid the foundation, and we will be picking up right where we left off next week. Can't wait to see you. God bless you. See you same time next week. Bye bye.